tell us about your real-life experiences from the series I Told You So. When I was a kid, my sister and I were sledding down this really steep hill. At one point, I accidentally went down a path that had a hidden jump. I flew off, landed hard, and felt a sharp pain in my back. When I climbed back up, I told my sister, "Don't go that way, it really hurts after the jump." She just called me a wimp and didn't believe me. Of course, she went down the exact same route. She hit the jump, landed, and didn't get back up. Turned out she broke her leg from the impact. While we were dragging her back to the car, I couldn't resist telling her, "See, I told you so." Years later, when my buddy and I were about 20, we pulled the same kind of genius move. We decided to sled straight into a giant snow pile in a parking lot, like it was some kind of ramp. Both of us squeezed onto one sled. I was in front, he was behind, legs sticking out on the sides. We launched off the ramp, went at least 15 feet into the air, and came crashing down straight onto asphalt. Somehow, we didn't break a single bone. Just pure dumb luck. When I was 14, every time I ate apples, my throat would start itching. I told my mom, but she thought I was just making excuses because I didn't want to eat them, so she kept insisting. Eventually, we went to the doctor and did an allergy test. Turns out I was allergic to apples, peaches, and a whole bunch of other fruits. So yeah, guess I wasn't just being picky after all. Back when my partner and I were struggling a bit financially, we always made sure to save a little for fun nights or takeout. One night, we decided to get fish and chips, my favorite spot. Money was tight, so we had to be smart with the order. I said, let's only get what we can actually eat. We were on our way, and I was about to call in the order when he suddenly says he wants to get $10 worth of fries. One portion usually costs $2 to $3. I tried to convince him it was madness, especially since the portions at this place were huge. He insisted, "I'm starving, I'll eat it all." A mini argument started in the car, but I finally gave in. Fine, order it, but you eat all of it. We get to the place, approach the counter, and the elderly owner asks, "Is this your order?" I nod and smile. My partner says, "Yes." The guy looks worried. I start laughing. I had warned him. When the old man brought out 2 enormous portions of fries, my partner finally realized the disaster. One portion could feed an entire family. We all laughed so hard. We thanked the man and went home. And no, he didn't even finish the first portion. Since then, whenever one of us wants the other to just trust their judgment, we say $10 on fries and the other instantly gives in. I still laugh thinking about his face when the guy handed us the order. At our little zoo, there was a section with llamas. I warned this clueless lady, let's call her Zilla, not to get too close, but she didn't listen. Naturally, the llamas had enough of her nonsense and covered her from head to waist in gooey green slime. She started gagging, and I couldn't stop laughing until I realized the smell was spreading. Yeah, I ended up gagging too. I had been going to the doctor multiple times complaining about breathing problems. Sometimes the symptoms showed up, sometimes they disappeared. And the classic response, "It's fine, it will go away on its own." Eventually, I ended up in the emergency room with an asthma attack. The following week, I returned to the doctor, and this time I deliberately kept the hospital wristband on my arm. Back then, I was just starting out as a system administrator and was completely green. I got my first major project because the lead admin suddenly left due to health issues. The project involved a 2-node database cluster. I struggled, but the team helped me out. One day, while checking network connections, I noticed that both database servers were connected to the same switch, a clear SPOF, or a single point of failure. I mentioned it to the senior network engineer and he brushed it off. "Switches are reliable, don't worry about it." I brought it up again in the next meeting. If we want to meet our SLA, we need 2 separate switches. The senior engineer dismissed it again. As a newbie, I didn't push further. The system went live a week later, and of course, 5 days after launch, the cursed switch failed. Both nodes went down, the database was unreachable, and the application crashed. The client lost a ton of money. During post-mortem, they asked why both servers were on one switch. I said I had warned them, but the network engineer insisted it was fine, and I got persuaded. The best part? The boss asked the senior engineer, "Still think it's fine?" My best friend started dating my ex-wife 10 years after our divorce, and he still asked me first if I was okay with it, even though he didn't have to. We divorced because she cheated on me while I was serving overseas. Then he moved to another state for work and called me saying she was acting strangely. She wasn't answering calls, cut conversations short, often picked fights with him at home, and spent more time at parties than with him. I told him she did exactly the same things when she was with me, almost point by point, and warned him that if he tried to talk to her about it, she'd probably accuse him of cheating, and most likely because she was cheating herself. He then gave me a half-hour lecture about how she had changed, matured, had been independent for years, and hadn't had a real relationship in a long time. 3 hours later, he called back and said he went to buy some magic gummies and caught her in the act with the dealer. I was throwing toy knives at a piece of wood. My dad told me to be careful, like the knife might bounce back and hurt me. I thought that was impossible, so I kept going. And of course, it happened. The knife bounced off the wood and hit my foot. When my dad came over to see how serious it was, he asked what happened. I said the knife bounced back and hit my foot. He just said, "Well, I told you so." My brother had this silly habit of carrying his wallet in his back pocket. He'd walk around like that everywhere, in crowds, at work, all over town. The wallet was literally sticking out. I warned him for years that he was practically asking asking to be robbed, and that his killed thief could easily snatch it without him noticing. He always brushed me off, claiming he was careful and nothing like that would happen to him. One day, he came home pale as a sheet. Turns out he actually got robbed. His bank cards, ID, a bunch of important documents, and of course cash were all gone. I just said, well, I did warn you. Back in high school, I ended up at a party where everyone was sipping the forbidden apple juice. I came there with 2 friends, and near the end of the night, this one dude was gathering people into his van to go grab food. He kept swearing up and down that he wasn't drunk, and there were so many people crammed inside that arguing about it felt pointless. Still, the whole situation looked ridiculously dumb. Imagine, a bunch of underage kids stuffed into a van cruising around the suburbs at 1 a.m. I told my friends this was a terrible idea and asked them to get out and walk home with me instead. I live nearby, and while they complained that I was being a buzzkill, they eventually agreed. The next day, I found out that the guy ran a red light and got T-boned by a truck. One kid in the backseat nearly didn't make it. Everyone inside got hurt. My friends, the same ones I pulled out minutes before, had been sitting in the back. I don't want to say I saved their lives, but maybe I actually did. One time, my mom, my sister, and I were out picking beans. For some reason, the fence around the field was electrified. Still no clue why. I touched it by accident, got zapped, and jumped back. It hurt, but it was manageable. I told my sister, the fence is electric. She thought I was messing with her and just laughed it off. I kept warning her the whole time we were picking beans, but she wouldn't believe me. Near the end, she touched the fence herself, totally unprepared, and just yelled, "Oh, snap!" Let's just say the drive home was entertaining. And yeah, I couldn't resist saying, "Told you so, doofus." When I was applying to medical school, there was an essay question. What will you do if you don't get in? I decided to take a risk. This school was my dream, and I wanted to stand out with an unusual answer. I thought about it for a long time, wondering if it would be better to write something standard, but in the end, I went for it. I wrote that I would go to law school and become a lawyer, specializing in cases of medical mishaps. They invited me for an interview, and one of the interviewers even laughed at my answer, but I still didn't get into that med school. Instead, I became a lawyer. I once had to fire a partner after noticing some weird discrepancies between his expenses and income. He couldn't clearly explain where his money came from. Another partner didn't agree with my decision and refused to look at the evidence, so she left and started a new firm with him. Eventually, it turned out he had swiped $500,000 from a client. He lost his license and is now waiting for his court trial. I kept telling her, look at the evidence, but she didn't want to. I told my mom, who's a nurse, that I was feeling really sick, and she accused me of lying. After about 2 months and a lot of blood I had already started coughing up, she finally took me to a doctor. It turned out I had pneumonia and a double ear infection, plus a bunch of other issues I barely remember now. The doctor prescribed 7 different medications and daily use of a nebulizer. This was the most memorable I told you so moment of my life. I told my mom, who isn't a nurse, that I felt awful and asked to stay home because throwing up in a school bathroom is disgusting. Of course, she said no. So I waited until she left for work, came back home, and laid on the bathroom floor hugging the toilet. Soon the school called, and when my mom got home, she found me there. I was still sick for 2 more days, severely dehydrated, and she kept insisting I was faking it. Finally, my dad, who'd been quietly watching the whole time, drove me to the emergency room. Diagnosis: acute pancreatitis. My pancreas was on the verge of bursting. I spent a whole week in the hospital. I told you so. Then for 2 more years, I kept getting bills for the treatment. I told my dad to invest in Bitcoin back in 2013. Fast forward 8 years, where are we now? Even though the price went up and some people made money, I still feel like Bitcoin failed its original purpose in a way. It was supposed to be a currency freely exchanged between people without banks or governments, but it became more like a stock. People traded on exchanges or just hold it, keeping it out of circulation. So those early adopters who spent Bitcoin when it was basically worthless, like the guy who bought pizza with 7 Bitcoins, shouldn't feel bad. At that moment, they were using it as money, exactly as intended. Nobody knew it would turn into a speculative bubble. I had a friend who was ridiculously stubborn. He hated being advised on anything. I honestly don't know how we stayed friends for so many years, because I'm the type who always points out problems. Our personalities were completely mismatched. I work at a US Navy shipyard. My worst "I told you so" moment was with a submarine that had major issues in its sanitation tanks and the pipes running from showers and toilets into those tanks. For 12 weeks straight, I documented the same problems and reported them. Management and the guy in charge of those tanks just ignored my notes. At the deadline for taking the sub out of dry dock approached, the captain wanted everything on schedule. They pushed forward the timeline for closing the tanks. By protocol, that requires 3 signatures from a certified civilian inspector, a naval hull tech, and a naval engineering officer. That same tank failed all 3 inspections. The launch had to be delayed by 30 days while everything was fixed. Daily operational costs were over $10,000 a day. With all the overtime and rework, that number easily tripled. And that's just labor costs. Material costs? I didn't even see the full bill, but I know a lot had to be fabricated on the spot or rushed in, all because nobody listened. I once had a dog, very stubborn and independent. As a puppy, she lived in the mountains like a little wildling. I think that shaped her personality. Honestly, she felt more like a roommate than a pet. As she got older, she developed heart problems and we needed a chest x-ray. Two guys from the vet clinic approached her and I warned them she absolutely hates being flipped onto her back. For dogs, that's the ultimate submission pose. One of them interrupted me saying, "Relax, we're pros, trust us." They put a silly muzzle on her and tried to carry her away. A few seconds later, I heard a crash and some panicked yelling. One of the guys came out awkwardly asking for help. Apparently, the moment they flipped her, she wriggled free, unbuckled the muzzle with her paws, and zoomed off. I caught her in the clinic yard. She calmly sat on my lap while I held her during the x-ray. I felt really bad for the guys, but I had warned them. We also had a dog named Ancient, a pit bull mix who loved jumping over fences. One time we had to leave him at a pet sitter's. They had two fences in the yard. The outer fence was super tall. No way he could jump that. But we warned them that he would absolutely leap the inner fence. They laughed, explaining how carefully they'd set up the yard and that nothing like this had happened in 10 years. I just said, then get ready to chase him. A couple of days later, when we picked him up, they told us that the moment he got into the yard, he jumped the inner fence. It was the first time they'd seen a dog literally flying. The Ancient spent an entire hour happily playing chase with the staff. Too bad they didn't film it. I would have loved to see that. When my daughter was a newborn, she would throw up violently after every single feeding. I took her to the doctor multiple times, but they kept brushing me off and telling me to just switch the formula. I tried 4 different ones. Nothing changed. On the 4th or 5th appointment, they said the same thing again. I was practically begging them to actually check what was wrong, but they wouldn't listen. So I walked straight out of the clinic and drove to the ER. That very same day, she had to undergo emergency surgery. The surgeon told me that if we had waited any longer, she might have died, either from starvation or dehydration. Later, I confronted the doctors who kept ignoring me. It turned out this was a textbook case of pyloric stenosis. The surgeon even said it's pretty common. It happens more often in boys, so maybe that's why they didn't think of it for my daughter, but honestly, I don't understand how they could have missed it. I noticed a very dark birthmark appearing on my body, almost the color of chocolate. I showed it to my husband. He said I was just being paranoid and that I'd be wasting a doctor's time if I went to get it checked. Still, I went to a dermatologist. It turned out I had melanoma. I was helping a now former friend with renovations in the house he had just bought. I understood a little about what I was doing, and our friend who was there with us definitely knew what was going on, but the homeowner barely knew which end of a hammer to hold. We went down to the foundation, and there was almost a new 4x4 post going from floor to ceiling. He said it looked ugly and wanted to remove it. I tried explaining that it was obviously load-bearing. Our friend chimed in too, saying that the post wasn't just placed there for fun. He muttered that we were hysterical and laughed at the idea that we thought the ceiling might fall. I stepped back and he took a mallet and hit the post. Literally, we watched the ceiling stack. He still thought I was exaggerating until we went upstairs and saw a 7-centimeter gap between the floor and the baseboard along the front wall. My mom was studying to be a nurse. I used to hike in the mountains near our house in Southern California, where poison oak was everywhere. Sometimes even our dog would bring it home on its fur. Eventually, I started breaking out in a rash, and then red, itchy bumps appeared all over my skin. My mom gave me calamine lotion and tea tree oil, but nothing helped. I kept telling her, I know what poison oak looks like. This isn't it. She didn't believe me. This went on for 6 months. Finally, we went to a doctor. The first 3 didn't figure it out. The 4th looked at me and said, it's scabies. Here's the cream and the pills. You'll be fine in 2 days. 2 days later, I was finally okay after 6 months of misery. One day, he announced he wanted bright blue hair and planned to dye it over the weekend. Coincidentally, one of my interests was hair. I wasn't an expert, but I had read a lot about bleaching and coloring, and I understood the process. So I said, cool, just make sure you bleach in stages so you don't ruin your hair. Some stylists do it all at once, and it can really damage your hair. He looked at me with the most exhausted and annoyed expression possible and said, oh my god, I'm sure she knows what she's doing. She's the professional, not you. Ouch. Point taken. He was right. I wasn't an expert, and I jumped in with unsolicited advice. After that, I kept my hair opinions to myself. Over the weekend, he dyed his hair, posting pictures online, from dark hair to platinum blonde and then to bright blue, all in one day. The color turned out great, but the hair looked severely damaged. I stayed quiet. He even came up to me, proudly showing off, almost saying, see, I told you so, posing and spinning around. I congratulated him and said, looks like I was wrong. A week later, his hair was noticeably shorter. I immediately knew it was breaking. Then he showed up at school with a shaved head. I didn't say a word or ask questions. Someone else asked him, what happened to your hair? He calmly explained that it had been damaged and he had to shave it off. I never said anything. I didn't want to look like a jerk, but oh, it felt so satisfying inside. This little moment of quiet vindication. This happened during a move. The bed frame wasn't properly secured in the car, but my partner insisted that the weight weight of the frame would keep it in place. During a left turn, the bed flew straight into the middle of a busy intersection. We had to pick up the pieces while dodging cars on a 4-lane road. I gave him a death stare and he just said, I know, you were right, sorry. Since then, I've teased him every move about that incident. Now it's funny, but at the time, I was seriously angry. Wow, what a dork. A long time ago, I worked with a guy who told me a story about his brother. His brother had just moved into a new apartment across town. They spent the whole day moving things into the new place. Almost done, just one last trip with a rocking chair in the truck. His brother said, don't worry, no need to secure it, it won't go anywhere. Well, at almost 60 miles per hour, the wind picked up the chair, it flew out of the truck, crossed several lanes, and hit another car's windshield. That car crashed, and sadly, the driver died. His brother went to jail for involuntary manslaughter.